Hello and welcome to Read Red. Today we're talking about The Man Without Qualities by Robert Musil. So I finally did it. I finally read Musil's The Man Without Qualities. Maybe the eagle-eyed amongst you would notice that I haven't finished it technically, neither did Musil, but basically where I'm up to and what I've read. For those of you who don't know about the book, Musil was a sort of modernist writer who was writing in the, very early 19th or 20th century, and he wrote some stuff before The Man Without Qualities, but around 1920 he started working on The Man Without Qualities, and he wrote it consistently for 20 years until he passed away in 1943 or something like that, and the book is famously not finished. So in terms of works that were actually published, it seems like Musil kind of begrudgingly published earlier chapters, which I think he needed to, otherwise his wife would have murdered him. But in terms of what's actually been published and has put out, we have three sections. There's an introduction, a chapter that is called Pseudo-Reality Prevails, or I guess a kind of big chunk or book, and then another unfinished third chapter, which is called Into the Millennium. Now, what we also have in this collection are 30-ish chapters that were sent to the galleys to be printed, and then last minute Musil redacted them because he wanted to keep working on them. They never got finished and he passed away before that happened. I'm currently reading those. I'm still working through, so for anyone who has read the book, basically I'm kind of just up to the part now where Agatha and Linda are talking at Linda's house and they're having a conversation. But I have read everything that was actually published of The Man Without Qualities. I'm keen to keep reading and go through and read the posthumous papers. Essentially, we hit the deadline of me needing to make this video, but also I was just like, okay, I am ready to move on to reading something else. However, I know that this video is going to be very sort of rambling and hard to keep focused because I got to the end of reading all of the published material and I thought, wow, that was incredible. I am never ever going to forget January 2025 because of how much time I spent with Musil. What was it about? Nothing. Nothing happened. And even to the point where I think something on page 700, a plot related thing happens and it literally shocked me. I was like, oh my gosh, do I need to write this down? I just learned a thing that happens. What? But the idea of the novel, so Musil is often compared to Proust. And again, I've not read that much of Proust, but I would say that reading Musil, basically it scratched the exact same itch as what reading Proust did, except in Proust, the narrator is kind of plopped into French aristocracy, whereas with Musil, the character is plopped into Austrian intelligentsia. As concise as I can possibly do, I'm just reminded of that Monty Python bit of them trying to explain the the plot of Proust, but trying to just be super concise. What happens in The Man Without Qualities? Essentially, we have a main character whose name is Ulrich. He is the titular man without qualities. He is 30-something years old, super smart, but he doesn't have, he knows so much that he doesn't necessarily have convictions in the beliefs that he have. He's jumped around from different careers. Right now, he's a mathematician, but essentially, he's just a very smart dude. He's a Musil sort of insert. I think there's a balance between whether or not Musil completely fully identifies with Ulrich or if there's, some divagation, already not being concise. Anyway, the book is set right before the fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It's around 1913, 1914, and what has happened is a committee has been started effectively by a woman named Diotima, or titled Diotima, called the Parallel Campaign. Someone, I think it's her, has the genius idea of the year of Austria. They're preparing for the 70th Jubilee of the Emperor, and so she is trying to kind of reunite Austria, ignite the Austrian spirit. She has this genius idea of the year of Austria, and however, she then says, okay, well, I need to get a bunch of really smart people together, get them in a room so that we can talk shit, figure out, what exactly the best ideas are and how to unite Austria. So essentially, it's a really genius idea from Musil's part to set up a book where just a bunch of people who know and who have these convictions and who are really smart get into a room and they talk. And they just battle ideas together. We've got some characters who are kind of referencing and referring to the budding white supremacy and Nazism, like German superiority ideas, because obviously Musil is living through that. And just keep in mind as well, Musil didn't even live to the end of the Second World War. But anyway, we've got this lingering sense of doom because we know that, World War One's really just about to start. And that's it. So the book just keeps going. Something like 900 pages in, we get introduced to the main character's sister, Agatha. And the end of the book, pretty much what happens is, or the end of the published stuff, what happens is another dinner party happens. There's a anti-Diotima, another woman who is like gonna come in and is trying to rally people, not in the intellectual side, but more in the kind of action side. That dinner party ends, and so does the book. And it's literally like cutting to black mid-sentence. And, obviously doing some digging on the book afterwards, no one knows how Musil really wanted to end The Man Without Qualities. Nobody knows how long it was going to be, although some people think that the book in its current published form is about half the length it was meant to be, which is incredible. But yeah, I don't know what to say. I don't know what else to add about it, except I'm going to try and be concise. I'll focus in really quick on a couple of characters, but I'm going to try and not ramble. It'd be very easy to ramble. But yeah, I'm going to focus on some characters. I'll definitely read some extracts because need to sort of experience Musil's writing, and then we'll just call it because there's no way. It's one of those books that, like Proust, it's so hard to talk about because you just feel like the most reducible version of the book is the book itself, and so everything else is kind of doing it a discredit. But anyway, let's get started. Here are just some one-liners that I wrote about the book that should help contextualize it and try to convince you to read it if you haven't already. I audibly sighed in relief as soon as I read the first page because I was worried that Musil's prose was going to be hard to get through. And, when you pick up a 1,200 page book, it's like, how is the experience of actually reading it? It's brilliant. Musil's prose is extremely crisp, super precise, and obviously that would go into the translation by Sophie Wilkins and Burton Pike. The book is a breeze to read. I would not worry about that at all. It does focus on some pretty heady concepts. There's almost no jargon that I imagined, or at the very least, maybe a better way of saying that is, I thought I understood what everyone was talking about. So, yeah. But that was, I probably didn't understand it, but I thought I did, which should be an indication of how seamless the prose is. Musil, even though he writes about the man without qualities, Musil is the man with 1,000 similes, because there is probably a simile on every single page. It's like a writing tick that he has, in the same way that I think Italo Calvino often uses like this trinity of sentence structures. And basically, I just feel like I spent a lifetime with these people, like with having read Gravity's Rainbow, in that there's not that much that I remember about it, but I kind of have these waking memories of just being like, oh yeah, that happened in the book. Oh yeah, that happened. And when I flick through to a random page of Musil, I'm just like, oh yeah, God, it's like I'm unlocking these chapters in a library that now exist in my head that I don't remember. Key characters. Ulrich, I've already talked about, and we'll talk about him. Ulrich has some friends, Walter and Clarissa, who are extremely interesting. They were childhood friends. Walter and Clarissa got married. There's now some conflict with them, and Clarissa goes fully to bully crazy. She is like, yeah, and I'll talk about that a little bit more with Moosbrugger, but there are some kind of very dramatic scenes, and like Clarissa is really unhinged. Diotima, she's the head of the parallel campaign, and we also have Arnheim, who is kind of a mirror to Ulrich in that he is also very smart, but he is a kind of a man who actually manifests these, and he has these convictions because he's very popular. He's a writer. He's sort of the capital I intellectual man. He writes a lot of books. He's very wealthy, and he talks about, you know, having these anxieties of having money and so on. But yeah, the other really interesting character is Moosbrugger, where there's this trial that revolves around him. Moosbrugger is a serial killer who very violently murders a prostitute, and there's a kind of trial that's going on through the book, even though Musil seems to forget about it for like 500 pages and then brings it back up when it's relevant again. But essentially the idea with Moosbrugger is that the action that he committed is so violent and so insane that people are trying to get him free, claiming insanity rather than vicious murder. However, what happens with Moosbrugger is that he goes to the trial. They're like, dude, you did this absolutely insane thing. You must be crazy, right? And he was like, no, I kind of just did it. And I'm very much simplifying here, but everyone loses their mind at this. They were just like, no, you must be insane. And then so they're probing him, and this trial goes on for so long, and they eventually find out that Moosbrugger's got schizophrenia, and everyone's like, oh, thank God, we've now proved that you're crazy. You're hearing voices in your head, blah, blah, blah. And Moosbrugger's like, yeah, but, you know, I hear voices in my head all the time, and I'm not always committing murders. So Moosbrugger is really just reflecting this capacity for evil that is in a society, and you know, we get that explicitly where there are characters who are engaging in infidelity, and the reason why basically people are trying to prove that Moosbrugger's crazy, and because like they don't want to believe that a sane person who they are can commit evil. So yeah, it's a really interesting thing, and Musil blueballs us so hard because, slight spoiler, we almost see Moosbrugger. We have this, Clarissa has got this fascination with Moosbrugger, who she kind of believes he's like a dark messiah, or maybe a Samael, I don't know. But she really wants to go and see him. She's so fascinated with seeing him, and they go to the mental hospital, and then literally at the last minute they're just like, oh, sorry, you gotta leave now. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? We're like 90 pages from the end of the published material and we haven't seen him. But alas, maybe there's some stuff in the posthumous papers that will elucidate that for me. Anyway, that's pretty much all I can talk about, and I know I'm raving like a lunatic, but just like, please trust me, the book is worth reading. The actual experience of reading it page to page is very seamless. It's just long, and you have to know that it's unfinished and that it's going to leave a lot of questions floating up in the air. Let's just jump into it. I'll read some examples. There's quite a few extracts, but I'll try and select some really good ones. Describing Ulrich, the man without qualities. If all those leaps of attention, flexings of eye muscles, fluctuations of the psyche, if all the effort it takes for a man just to hold himself upright within the flow of traffic on a busy street could be measured, he thought, as he toyed with calculating the incalculable, the grand total would surely dwarf the energy needed by Atlas to hold up the world, and one could then estimate the enormous undertaking it is nowadays merely to be a person who does nothing at all. At the moment, the man without qualities was just such a person. Musil's chapters also have great titles. Chapter 4 is, if there is a sense of reality, there must also be a sense of possibility, and here is an extract in it. But the possible includes not only the fantasies of people with weak nerves, but also the as yet unawakened intentions of God. A possible experience of truth is not the same as an actual experience or truth minus its reality value, but has, according to its partisans at least, something quite divine about it. A fire, a soaring, a readiness to build, and a conscious utopianism that does not shrink from reality, but sees it as a project, something yet to be invented. After all, the earth is not that old, and apparently never was so ready as now to give birth to its full potential, which is reminding me of some of the stuff that Rilke wrote in his letters. But just, yeah, I hope I'm kind of emphasizing or bringing the point home of how readable Musil is. And it's like, yeah, there's some pretty cool stuff in there, but no jargon, not that hard to understand, right? Here's a really great Musil simile. In every profession followed not for money but for love, there comes a moment when the advancing years seem to lead to a void. After this moment had lasted for some time, Ulrich remembered that a man's native country is supposed to have the mysterious power of making the mind take root and thrive in its true soil, and so he settled there with the feeling of a hiker who sits down on a bench for eternity, but with the thought that he will be getting up again immediately. Bernhard, I'm just gonna say his name. I fear that this book made me crazy. Anyway, this is in a chapter called The Most Important Attempt of All. Of course, there is no denying that all these primordial dreams appear, in the opinion of non-mathematicians, to have been suddenly realized in a form quite different from the original fantasy. Baron Munchausen's post-horn was more beautiful than our canned music. The 7-league boots was more beautiful than a car. Oberon's kingdom lovelier than a railway tunnel. The magic root of the mandrake better than a telegraphed image. Eating of one's mother's heart and then understanding birds more beautiful than an ethologic study of a bird's vocalizing. We have gained reality and lost dream. No more lounging under a tree and peering at the sky between one's big and second toes. There's work to be done. Like, there's so, again, just like, I cannot fathom how rich this book is and how good Musil is at just kind of describing characters in this completely fleshed out way. There's got to be some sense of just a quantity bias, right? Because there are characters in this book where I think that these are some of the most fleshed out female characters that I've ever read. But then it's also like, well, any character who gets like 200 pages devoted to them is automatically going to be pretty fleshed out, right? It also helps that Musil is a genius, but this is talking about Walter, our old mate Walter. While he was naturally as ready as the next person to take credit for his successes, his knack for being borne upward with such ease by every lucky chance had always troubled him as a terrifying sign that he was a lightweight. As often as he moved on to new activities and new people, he did it not simply from instability, but in great inner turmoil, driven by anxiety that he had to move on to safeguard his spiritual integrity before he took root where the ground was already threatening to give way under him. His life had been a series of convulsive experiences from which emerged the heroic struggle of a soul resisting all compromise, never suspecting that in this way it was only creating its own dividedness. For all the time he was suffering and struggling for his intellectual integrity as befits a genius, and investing all he had in his talent, which was not quite a great talent, his fate had silently led him in an inward full circle back to nothing. He had at long last reached the point where no further obstacles stood in his way. The quiet, secluded, semi-scholarly job that sheltered him from the corruptions of the art market gave him all the time and independence he needed to listen exclusively to his inner call. The woman he loved was his, so there were no thorns in his heart. At the house on the brink of solitude they had taken after they married could not have been more suitable for creative work. But now that there was no longer anything left to overcome, the unexpected happened. The works promised for so long by the greatness of his mind failed to materialize. Walter seemed no longer able to work. And this is the first, I remember reading this and just being like, Clarissa is bad news. This is going to be the most interesting, tragic character She had considered Walter a genius since she was 15 because she had always intended to marry only a genius. She would not let him fail her in this, and when she realized that he was failing, she put up a frantic struggle against the suffocating, slow change in the atmosphere of their life. It was at this point that Walter could have used some human warmth, and when his helplessness tormented him, he would clutch at her like a baby wanting milk and sleep. But Clarissa's small, nervous body was not maternal. She felt abused by a parasite trying to ensconce itself in her flesh, and she refused herself to him. She scoffed at the steamy laundry warmth in which he sought to be comforted. It is possible that was cruel, but she wanted to be the wife of a great man and was wrestling with destiny. Alright, we're out of the introduction and we're into Pseudo-Reality Prevails. This is Ulrich and Diotima talking about what exactly the parallel campaign is going to be about, and kind of omniscient narrator, but focusing Diotima's thoughts. No one who speaks of the greatest and most important thing in the world means anything that really exists. What peculiar quality of the world would it be equivalent to? It all amounts to one thing being greater and more important, or more beautiful and sadder than another. In other words, the existence of a hierarchy of values and the comparative mode, which surely implies an endpoint and a superlative. But if you point this out to someone who happens at the very moment to be speaking of the greatest and most important thing in the world, that person will suspect that she is dealing with an individual devoid of feelings and ideals. A kind of long simile. This is from the chapter named Nature and Substance of a Great Idea. It would be easy to say what this idea consisted of, but no one could possibly describe its significance. For what distinguishes a great, stirring idea from an ordinary one, possibly even from an incredibly ordinary and mistaken one, is that it exists in a kind of molten state through which the self enters an infinite expanse and, inversely, the expanse of a universe enters the self, so that it becomes impossible to differentiate between what belongs to the self and what belongs to the infinite. This is why great stirring ideas consist of a body, which, like the human body, is compact yet frail, and of an immortal soul, which consists its meaning but is not compact. On the contrary, it dissolves into thin air at every attempt to grab hold of it, in cold words. And then, I just love Musil so much. Like, this is another one of those books that it's so insane that I just want to be like, read it again. Just like, read it again. But nothing in this chapter that I want to point out, except that chapter number 28, which I'm enjoying that I will very soon be 28, is called A Chapter That May Be Skipped by Anyone Not Particularly Impressed by Thinking as an Occupation. Don't let Musil's matter of factness kind of distract you from realizing that he can have some really poetic ideas. Even I think that whole like molten state of ideas is somewhat pathetic, but somewhat poetic, not pathetic. But I was just channeling Clarissa thinking about Walter. But the houses beside it, the firmament above, the indescribable harmony of all the lines and spaces that caught and guided the eye, the look and expression of the people passing below, their books, their morals, the trees along the street. It all seems at times as stiff as folding screens, as hard as a printer's die stamp, complete. There is no other way of putting it. So complete and finished that one is mere superfluous mist beside it, a small exhaled breath God has no time for anymore. This is in an encounter or a chapter where Diotima and Arnheim are kind of sitting chatting on a mountain, and this is kind of sort of following Arnheim, but it says this. And you know what it is, again, like so many of these extracts are so hard to make sense out of context, but just trust that Musil did a good job. And if I'm introducing things like an it or something like that, just don't worry about it. You don't need to know what it is. In youth, it manifests itself as a distinct feeling of insecurity about whether everything one does is really the right thing after all. In old age, as a sense of wonder at how little one has done of all one has really meant to do. In between, one takes comfort in the thought that one is a hell of a good, capable fellow, even if every little thing can't be justified, or that the world is not the way it ought to be either, so that one's failures come to represent a fair enough compromise. Then there are always some people who think beyond all this of a God who has their missing piece in his pocket. Only love has a special position in this. In this exceptional case, the missing half grows back. The beloved seems to stand where ordinarily something was always missing. The souls unite dos a dos, as it were, making themselves superfluous in the process. This is why most people, after the one great love in their youth is over, no longer feel the absence of their soul, so that this so-called foolishness fulfills a useful social function. You know that great bit where kind of Neil Gaiman is getting interviewed and someone walks up to him and just says, "Where do you get your ideas?" And, like asking someone where they get their ideas is just ridiculous. But I feel like if I were to meet Musil, if Musil were to manifest in front of me and I were to have a conversation with him, I would just be like, how do you think these things? In a chapter called Diotima Discovers the Strange Ways of Great Ideas. It appeared that she was living in a great age, since the age was full of great ideas, but one would not believe how hard it was to translate the greatest and most important of them into reality, considering that all the conditions for doing so existed except one, knowing which of them was the greatest and most important. Every time Diotima had opted in favor of some idea, she could not help noticing that its opposite was equally great and equally worthy of realization. That's the way it is, after all, and she couldn't help it. Ideals have curious properties, and one of them is that they turn into their opposites when one tries to live up to them. And actually, there's a similar thing. So there's a chapter in this book where a general goes to a library and he's looking for something. I'm actually not going to describe it here. I'm going to recommend you go and check out Strange Lucidity's video, where she talked about all of the books she had to read for a certain year. I'll try and find it. I hope I remember which video she talks about it, but she describes the interaction of General Stumm going to a library, and so I recommend going and seeing her video for that. Just a kind of one-liner, but for quite obvious reasons, every generation treats the life into which it is born as firmly established, except for those few things it is interested in changing. So this is interesting. We've got Gerda and Hans Sepp. So Gerda is the daughter of some friends that Ulrich knows, and they get into a kind of interesting relationship, but Hans Sepp is her partner, boyfriend, intellectual, whatever, but basically he's the kind of the proto-Nazi insert character. And I'm going to read a little bit about him, but then on the same page we've got a chapter or a paragraph about a Gerda interacting with and interfacing with him. It would be hard to say what these young people actually believed in. They formed one of those innumerable, undefined, free-spirited little sects that have infested German youth ever since the breakdown of the humanistic ideal. They were not racial anti-Semites, but opponents of the Jewish mind, by which they meant capitalism and socialism, science, reason, parental authority and parental arrogance, calculation, psychology, and skepticism. Their basic doctrinal device was the symbol, as far as Ulrich could make out, and he had, after all, some understanding of such things. What they meant by symbol was the great images of grace, which made everything that is confused and dwarfed in life, as Hans Sepp put it, clear and great, images that suppress the noise of the senses and dip the forehead in streams of transcendence. And then skipping down a little bit, Gerda, who was no fool, secretly felt not a little distrust towards these overblown sentiments, but she also distrusted her distrust, in which she thought she detected the legacy of her parents' rationalism. Behind her facade of independence, she was anxiously at pains to disobey her parents, in dread that her bloodlines might hinder her from following Hans's ideas. Gerda's parents have some Jewish heritage. She felt deeply mutinous against the taboos girding the morals of her so-called good family and against the arrogant parental rights of intrusion that threatened to suffocate her personality, while Hans, who had no family at all, as her mother put it, suffered much less than she did. He had emerged from her circle of companions as Gerda's spiritual guide, passionately harangued the girl, who was as old as he was, trying to transport her with his tirades accompanied by kisses into the region of the unconditional, though in practice he was quite adept at coming to terms with the conditioned state of the official household, it's Gerda official, as long as he was permitted to reject it on principle, which of course always led to rows with Papa Leo. In a chapter called The Industrial Potentate and the Merger of Soul with Business, Also, all roads to the mind start from the soul, but none lead back again. Skipping quite a bit forward. Anyone inclined to find fault should remember that having a split personality has long since ceased to be a trick reserved for lunatics. At the present day tempo, our capacity for political insight, for writing a piece for the newspapers, for faith in the new movements in art and literature, and for countless other things depends wholly on a knack for being, at times, convinced against our own convictions, splitting off a part of our mind and stretching it to form a brand new wholehearted conviction. So it was another point in Arnheim's favour that he never quite honestly believed what he was saying. In a chapter called Ulrich chats with Hans Sepp and Goethe in the jargon of the frontier between the super-rational and the sub-rational. If nowadays anyone told a story of God speaking to him personally, seizing him painfully by the hair to lift him up to himself, or slipping into his breast in some numinous, intensely sweet way, no one would take any of these details embodying the experience literally, least of all God's professional functionaries who, as children of a scientific age, feel an understandable horror at being compromised by hysterical and maniacal adherents. Consequently, we must either regard such experiences of frequent and well-recorded occurrence in the Middle Ages and in classical antiquity as delusions and pathological phenomena, or face the possibility that there is something to them, something independent of the mythical terms in which it has hitherto been expressed. A pure kernel of experience, in other words, that would have to pass strict empirical tests of credibility, whereupon it would of course become a matter of overriding importance long before anyone could deal with the next question, beyond conclusions to draw from this with regard to our relationship to the beyond. And while faith based on theological reasoning is today universally engaged in a bitter struggle with doubt and resistance from the prevailing brand of rationalism, it does seem that the naked fundamental experience itself, the primal seizure of mystic thought, stripped of all traditional terminological husks of faith, freed from ancient religious concepts, perhaps no longer to be regarded as a religious experience at all, has undergone an immense expansion and now forms the soul of that complex irrationalism that haunts our era like a night bird lost in the dawn. Gosh, this video is so long and I've just gotten on to part 2. I'm just going to read a couple of extracts because I really don't want to skip out. It's literally the start of this book, page 720, when a character gets introduced, which is Ulrich's sister Agatha, and there's a really cool interaction where she becomes this kind of internal mirror, and oh god, there's this beautiful way of describing it where Ulrich talks about how the manifestation of one's self-love usually comes within oneself, but it actually manifested and appeared as a different person, as Agatha, who, when they met, they were talking about being twins, and they refer to each other as Siamese twins. Here's just a description of Agatha, and then we'll call it. She did not have anything either emancipated or bohemian about her, even if she was sitting there in those wide trousers in which she had received her unknown brother. It was something hermaphroditic, as it now seemed to him. As she moved and gestured in talking, the light masculine outfit suggested the tender form beneath with the semi-transparency of water, and in contact to the independent freedom of her legs, she wore her beautiful hair up in true feminine style. But the center of this ambivalence was still her face, so rich in feminine charm, yet with something missing, something held in reserve, whose nature he could not quite make out. I had another half, if not another dozen extracts to read, but we are so at the end. I hope I've convinced you to read this book. I hope anyone reads this and joins me in the struggle. Game of Thrones, The Name of the Wind, everyone talking about incomplete works. Can someone join me in having enjoyed an incompleted Robert Musil? Please. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Thank you for tolerating a 15% increase in insanity in my presentation in this video. I think I'm also a little bit rusty in having not filmed for a while, but yeah, that was Robert Musil. The next book that I'm reading, a little bit of a spoiler, it happens to be a rather 700-ish page book that was taken out of my library immediately following alphabetically Anne Carson. So you can kind of think about who or what book that could be. That review will be coming out couple of weeks from now, but 2 weeks from now I'll have another video where I'm talking about just generally great ideas and great concepts that I've learned from reading. Anyway, let's just call it there. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video.